G'day, watch this.
A core duty of our government is the protection of the borders. Before the 2007 election, Kevin Rudd said he would turn back the boats. Well, he didn't. What he did was he dismantled the Howard Pacific solution. And the Gillard government after 2010 continued the same policy. What was the result? We got over 20,000 illegal immigrants. They were given, or many of them were given visas, and each of them would then exercise their family reunion rights. So we may be getting about 100,000, perhaps, people coming in. Most of them went on to welfare, and even after a number of years, stayed on welfare. And we also got between 600 to 1,000 people who lost their lives. Tony Abbott said in the Parliament that he wasn't saying that Julia Gillard had blood on her hands. She was certainly culpable. At some stage she realised that her policy was leading not only to illegal immigrants flooding into Australia, it was also leading to a substantial number of deaths, and she should have acted. Instead, she outsourced her policy. She put it to a committee of 3 experts who've come down with a solution which any person of common sense in Australia could have come up with. If you went to any pub in Australia, anywhere like that, you'd soon find that the average Australian was coming out with that sort of solution. They've been rather pompous in their solution because apparently they've said it's a package, you've got to take it all. Nothing or all. Well, that's ridiculous. They're not some infallible person. They're just giving their advice. And some of their recommendations, basically it's a good report, some of their recommendations I think are wrong. For example, they should have recommended the return of temporary protection visas so that there could not be family reunions. They should have recommended the turning back of the boats where it's safe to do so. To argue that you need the cooperation in advance of different governments means that we'd be delayed for years getting that. And Howard turned back boats, and the Sri Lankan government has shown that you can turn back boats. They should have also done some other things. Their argument that we should increase the refugee intake from a little over 13,000 to 20,000 and up to 27,000 is probably too much for the country to bear in a situation where there are people who are suffering in Australia and who are not getting the funding which they deserve. What we should do in relation to the refugee program is restore the Howard government's emphasis on Egypt and the Middle East, where there are assimilable people coming who could come into Australia. For example, the Copts, the other Christians in the Middle East who are suffering from real discrimination and who urgently need a solution. Because when you choose refugees, you should choose them on the basis not only of their need, but also of their assimilability and of their merit. That should be an important consideration. The other matter which they should have done is they should have recommended our statutory interpretation of the Migration Act. We should have insisted that only those coming directly from the place of persecution should be admitted. The idea that you could stop in a safe third country is completely unacceptable. The idea that you could shop around for a place to go to is unacceptable. And in addition, they should have ruled, and this should be a provision in the Act, that anybody coming into Australia from a safe third country without documents must be assumed to be exercising a subterfuge, acting in bad faith, and not allowed to apply for asylum in Australia. That's obvious. Now, these are some additional points which should have been undertaken, which may well mar the situation in the government's attempts to finalise the solution. But they were culpable when they found that they couldn't perform a fundamental part of the activities of government. If they couldn't have done that, they should have resigned. They should now admit their moral culpability in relation to putting a burden on Australian society. They should also admit their culpability in relation to the deaths of people trying to get to Australia.